The footman's fist hit the dispensary door at midnight, and Rosamond Talbot was already reaching for her coat before she was fully awake, her hands moving from long habit toward the shelf where the tinctures stood in their rows. Peter St. Aubin was 8 years old and burning, the footman said, his voice cracking on the word. Burning, ma'am. And the doctor has gone home, and his grace is sitting with the boy and won't leave him, and there is no one else. Rosamond wrapped a borrowed cloak over her nightclothes, tucked the basket under her arm, and walked out into the dark without lighting a lamp to find her shoes, because she already knew which ones were by the door. She had not been inside Rexcombe Hall before that night. She had not met the Duke of Rexcombe before that night. What she knew of Gareth St. Aubin was what any woman in Penrose Cross knew. Widower, 40, burdened, private, courteous at the market gate, and gone again before anyone could make anything of it. She did not think of him at all during the walk up the long drive. She thought of the basket and what was in it, and whether the boy had been drinking, and how high a fever could go in a child of 8 before the body began to lose the argument with itself. She found Peter in the second-floor room with the low ceiling and the fire banked too high. Someone had banked it too high, trying to sweat the fever out, which was exactly wrong. Gareth St. Aubin was kneeling at the left side of the bed, with his son's hand held in both of his, and he looked up when Rosamond came through the door with an expression that was not hope, precisely, but something that had not yet given up on hope. He did not speak. She did not waste time speaking either. She set her basket on the table, crossed to the fire, and drew it back herself. The poker was hot, but she managed it. And then she knelt on the right side of the bed and put her hand on Peter's forehead and on his throat and on the inside of his wrist, reading him the way she had learned to read every patient who could not speak clearly for themselves. "How long?" she said. "Since this afternoon," Gareth said. "The physician said by midnight it would either break or—" He did not finish. "It hasn't broken," Rosamond said, "but it hasn't gone past where I can work with it. I need cold water, as cold as you can get from the well, and clean cloths, not the ones you've been using, fresh ones. And I need someone to keep the fire exactly where it is now, not higher, not lower. Can you do that?" "I can do all of it," Gareth said. "Then do the water first," she said, and he was already moving. She worked through the night with a particular, unhurried focus that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with necessity. The tinctures were measured by the light of the single candle she allowed. She needed to see the color. She told the footman, who offered more, and one candle was enough for that. She applied the cold cloths in rotation, timing the intervals by the length of her own breathing, which she had learned to use as a clock in rooms where clocks were a distraction. Peter was not conscious enough to be frightened, which was the mercy of it. And Gareth settled back into his place at the left side of the bed, and held his son's hand, and did not speak unless she asked him something, which she did, at intervals. Is his breathing faster than it was an hour ago? Does he ever run fevers in summer? Has he had the bark preparation before? And Gareth answered each question directly, without embellishment, which she found she was grateful for. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, the footman fell asleep in the chair by the door. Neither of them commented on it. The fire held. The candle burned low, and she replaced it from the box on the mantel without breaking the rhythm of the cloths. "You should sleep," Gareth said, very quietly, at some point before 3. "I'll sleep after," Rosamond said. "After what?" he asked. "After it breaks," she said. "It's going to break. The timing is right." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you know?" "Because I've sat with enough fevers to know what they feel like when they're turning," she said. "This one is turning. Another 2 hours, perhaps 3. She was right by 2 hours and 40 minutes. The change came gradually, and then all at once. The quality of Peter's breathing shifting from that tight, rapid flutter to something looser, the heat at his forehead giving way beneath her hand to a dampness that meant the fever had broken its own siege and retreated. Rosamond checked his pulse one final time, pressing 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist. And as she did so, her hand settled briefly over Gareth's, where it lay on the blanket at the edge of the boy's hand. Neither of them moved. The fire held its low, steady light. Outside, the first gray suggestion of dawn had begun to separate the window from the wall. Neither of them spoke, and neither pulled away. And when Rosamond finally lifted her hand, it was not because she wanted to. She came back to Rothmere Hall 4 times in the following week to monitor Peter's recovery. And then she came back because she was asked. And then she came back because the route through the dispensary garden and up the long drive had begun to feel, in some quiet and alarming way, like a habit. The routine that formed between her and Gareth was not planned by either of them. It was assembled from small decisions that neither acknowledged. The way he would find her in the garden when she arrived to check on Peter, walking beside her along the lavender row while she explained which herbs were useful for a child's convalescence and which were overprescribed. The way she had stopped explaining why she knew things, because he listened without requiring her to justify her knowledge, which was rarer than it should have been. One afternoon, a week into Peter's recovery, a quick summer rain came in off the fields without warning, and Gareth removed his coat and settled it over her shoulders before she had registered that it was raining at all. No question asked, no ceremony made of it. Just the coat and his hands briefly at her shoulders and then withdrawn. She wore it back to the dispensary that evening and hung it on the hook by the door and looked at it for a moment before she went upstairs to check on Lily. Lily was 6 and fair-haired and had the particular quality of small children who have lost too much too early, a watchfulness in her eyes that was too old for her face. She was Rosamond's niece by her late brother, orphaned 2 years past when the fever that had taken half the parish had taken her parents as well. And she had lived above the dispensary since then, sleeping in the small room with the sloped ceiling, asking questions about the dried herbs on the workbench with the focused intensity of a child who has decided that knowledge is something she can hold on to. "You smell like outside," Lily said from the bed. "I was in a garden," Rosamond said. "Whose garden?" Lily asked. "Rothmere Hall's," Rosamond said. Lily considered this. "Is the Duke's boy better?" "Much better," Rosamond said. "He'll be up by next week." "Good," Lily said with the authority of someone who had formed an opinion on the matter and was satisfied to have it confirmed, and turned over and went back to sleep. In the dispensary garden 3 days later, Gareth asked if she would show him how to prepare the tincture Peter would need to finish his recovery. Something he could manage himself without sending for her at odd hours, he said. Though there was something in the way he said it that suggested the odd hours were not the part he objected to. She showed him at the workbench, the measurement, the temperature of the water, the timing. When his hands were not quite right on the mortar, she adjusted them, and he let her. And then his fingers stayed curled over hers for a moment past the point where the instruction had ended, and neither of them commented on that either. It was the following Thursday when Vell's solicitor appeared. He came to the dispensary in the late morning under the pretext of a small estate matter. Something to do with the lease on the property, he said, which he understood was held through the late Mr. Talbot's arrangement and might benefit from review, Rosamond received him in the front room and answered his questions about the lease with the documents she kept in the drawer, which were in order, because she kept everything in order. He thanked her. He rose to go. At the door, he paused, with the particular timing of a man who has rehearsed the pause, and said that he hoped, while he was here, that he might mention something in a spirit of friendly concern. That a woman recently seen at Rothmere Hall at odd hours, should any talk arise, might find her guardianship of Lily questioned in certain quarters. He said it pleasantly. He said it the way a man says something he intends to be understood as a warning while maintaining the surface of a courtesy. Rosamond said, "Thank you for calling," and held the door. That night she sat at the workbench after Lily was asleep and worked through what she knew. Josiah Vell was a Talbot cousin, distant enough that she had met him only twice, at the funeral and at the reading of her brother's will, but close enough that the courts would give his petition a hearing. He stood to gain a small parcel of land, tied to Lily's inheritance if he secured the guardianship. She had known this since the will was read. She had thought, until this week, that her reputation was clean enough to make the challenge difficult. She sat with that thought and turned it over, examining it from the angle Vell's solicitor had just provided, and found that it was less solid than she had believed. She was not yet planning anything. She was only looking. The following night, she could not sleep, and at some point past midnight, she wrapped her coat around herself and walked up the drive to Rothmere Hall to check on Peter one final time. She told herself that was the reason, and it was true, and it was not the only reason. Gareth was in the corridor outside Peter's room when she arrived, a candle in his hand, and he did not seem surprised to see her. He did not say anything. He simply reached out and took her hand in the dark of the corridor, and she let him. And they stood there in silence for several minutes while the house breathed around them. And she was aware, in some part of herself that was very quiet and very certain, that this was ending. She did not know yet exactly how. She only knew the shape of it. She learned the rest the next morning. The baker's wife mentioned it while Rosamond was collecting her weekly order. Cheerfully, the way good news is delivered to someone assumed to be pleased by it. The Duke of Rothmere, she said, was to announce his engagement to Miss Cressida Lowell before the month was out. A very sensible arrangement, everyone agreed. The Lowell family's settlement would clear the estate's debts within the year, and 400 families would keep their tenancies, which was a relief to the whole county. Rosamond walked back to the dispensary with the bread under her arm. She set the bread on the counter. She stood in the front room for a moment with her hands at her sides. Then she went upstairs and began to pack. She packed one trunk, her medicines and instruments first, then Lily's things, then her own. She worked steadily and without stopping because she had found, over the years, that steadiness was the only way to get through the things that had to be done. When the trunk was packed, she came back downstairs and wrote 2 letters at the workbench. The first was formal. A notice to the landlord that the dispensary would be unoccupied from the following day, signed with her full name, left on the counter where it would be found. The second was shorter, and she addressed it to Peter alone, in the plain language she used when she talked to him about his medicines. Because he was 8, and he deserved an explanation, and she could not leave without giving him one. She told him that she had to go away for a while, and that she would think of him on Tuesdays when his tonic was due, and she tucked a small pressed sprig of feverfew inside the fold of the paper, so he would have something to hold. She left no note for Gareth. She had nothing to say to him that would not make the thing harder for both of them. And she had decided, in the long hour of the packing, that what she was doing was protective rather than cowardly. She was the variable. Remove the variable, and Vel lost his grounds for the petition. And Gareth kept the engagement, and the tenants kept their land. And Lily stayed safe wherever Rosamond could take her that was far enough away from Josiah Vel's reach. It was the cleanest solution she could find. She was aware that it cost her everything she had started to want, and she packed the trunk anyway. She and Lily were on the northern coach before the next dawn. Gareth arrived at the dispensary at mid-morning to find the door locked and a formal notice on the counter. He stood outside the locked door for a moment before he found the key under the flower pot, where she had mentioned once that she kept a spare for the delivery boy. He went inside and read the notice on the counter twice, standing in the empty front room that smelled of dried lavender and something else he could not name, which he had come to associate entirely with this place and with her. Then he stood in the dispensary garden for a long time without moving, looking at the lavender row until the stable boy from the hall found him there and asked if he was all right. And he said yes and walked back up the drive. He sat through the dinner his aunt, Lady Alderton, had arranged to formalize the Lowell engagement that Friday, sat through the soup and through the fish and into the first half of the second course. And then he set down his fork mid-sentence, in the middle of a remark he had been making about the autumn planting, and could not pick it up again. The room noticed? Lady Alderton noticed most particularly. She followed him from the dining room into the passage, and she was not a woman who softened things when directness would serve better. "You will go back in there," she said, "and you will finish that dinner." "I don't believe I will," Gareth said. Gareth. Her voice carried the full weight of 30 years of managing the St. Aubin family's affairs, and it was considerable. "The Lowell settlement clears everything, every debt your father left, every tenant's security. You agreed to this." "I agreed to it in February," he said, "when I thought it was the only option." "It is still the only option," Lady Alderton said. "Unless you're telling me you have found another source for £11,000. I don't know what you think has changed." "She left," Gareth said. The silence that followed was the kind that meant his aunt understood perfectly well what he meant, and was choosing how to answer it. "She left," Lady Alderton said finally, "because she is a sensible woman who understood her position, which is more than can be said for you at this moment." "I'm not going back into that dining room," Gareth said. "Then hear me plainly," Lady Alderton said, and her voice dropped to the register she used when she meant every word and would not repeat them. "Break this match, and I withdraw the family's remaining credit. All of it. The creditors will have grounds to accelerate the proceedings within the season, and 400 families will face the consequences of your father's debts before Christmas. That is not a threat. It is arithmetic. I am asking you to do the mathematics before you make a decision you cannot undo." Gareth did not answer her that night. It was Peter who changed things. He was still frail, still keeping to his bed for part of each day, but his mind was entirely recovered, and he had the focused patience of a child who has spent several weeks being carefully managed by adults and has learned to observe them closely in return. 3 days after the dinner, he told his father that Rosamond had left a letter for him alone. He said it simply, the way he said most things, sitting up in bed with the coverlet over his knees and his expression that of someone relaying a fact he considers important. "She wrote it to me," he said. "Not to you. She said in it that it was mine to keep." Gareth sat on the edge of the bed and read the letter Peter placed in his hands. It was short. It was written in plain language. the kind Rosamond used when she was talking about something she wanted to be clear about, with none of the careful hedging she used with adults. It told Peter that she had to go north for a while, and that she hoped his Tuesday tonic was going well, and that she would think of him on Tuesdays when the time came. A small pressed sprig of feverfew was folded inside the paper, slightly flattened, still holding its shape. Gareth set the letter down on the coverlet and sat without moving for several minutes. She had known which day Peter's tonic was due. She had planned her disappearance around his son's medical schedule, which meant she had not left in panic, had not left without thinking of the boy, had not left because she was frightened of the feeling between them. She had left in full knowledge of what she was leaving, and she had arranged it so that Peter would not feel forgotten, and she had taken nothing for herself in the arrangement, except the knowledge that she had protected everyone she could reach. He set the letter on the coverlet, stood up, went to his study, and wrote 2 letters of his own. The first was to Miss Cressida Lowell, formally releasing her from the engagement, with his apologies for any inconvenience caused to her family, and his assurance that the decision was his alone and reflected no fault in her. The second was to his solicitor, instructing him to begin negotiating the estate's debts on harder terms. Longer repayment schedules, reduced income for 2 or 3 seasons, whatever the creditors would accept without the dowry. It would cost more. It would take longer. 400 families might have a harder winter than they would have had otherwise, and that was a weight he intended to carry without setting it down. But he would not secure their futures by abandoning the woman who had sat through the night to save his son. He called for his horse to be saddled at first light. The only lead he had was a chemist's order for feverfew, placed under Rosamond Talbot's name at the apothecary in Ashwick 3 days before she left. The northern road, which meant she had taken the coach toward Chalky Abbot or beyond. He rode out alone the next morning before Lady Alderton was awake. Josiah Vell learned of Rosamond's departure from Penrose Cross within a week of her leaving, through the particular network of information that solicitors in small counties maintain without effort. He learned that she had no fixed address. He learned that the Duke of Wrexcombe had not accompanied her, and was not known to be in contact with her. He understood immediately what this meant in legal terms. He filed the formal custody petition on a Thursday, and dispatched his solicitor north with a magistrate's order and a deadline of noon. Rosamond must surrender guardianship of Lily wherever she was found, or face formal proceedings that would follow her regardless of where she went. The solicitor was a capable man who had done this sort of work before, and he knew how to move quickly. On the road, Rosamond moved through coaching inns and market towns with the efficiency of someone who has thought through each step. She paid for each night in coin, kept Lily beside her in the coach and at the table and in the room, and answered no questions about her destination from innkeepers or fellow passengers. She told Lily they were going north to visit a town she had always meant to see, and Lily accepted this with the adaptability of a child who has learned that adults sometimes have reasons they do not explain, and that the best response is to find something interesting to look at out of the window. Lily managed 2 weeks of travel before the chill set in. It began as the ordinary cold of an autumn coach, a sniff, a slight pallor, the kind of tiredness that Rosamond noted and watched without alarm. It worsened overnight at the Sparrow's Rest Inn outside Chalky Abbot, the way children's fevers do, with the particular suddenness that has no warning and allows no preparation. By morning, Lily was burning, and Rosamond knew before she put her hand to the child's forehead that they were not moving again today. She carried Lily inside to the best room the inn could manage, a low-ceilinged room with a small fireplace and a window that faced the yard, and settled her into the bed and began to work. The innkeeper's wife brought water without being asked twice, which Rosamond noted with gratitude. The fire was the right size. She had her basket. She had everything she needed except, for the first time in years, another person at the other side of the bed. She worked through the night the same way she had worked through Peter's fever. The cold cloths in rotation, the tinctures measured by the candle's light, the timing kept by her own breathing. It was a worse room and a harder chair, and she was entirely alone. And she did not allow herself to think about that last part because it was not useful. She talked to Lily in a low voice when the child was restless. The same words she used at home, above the dispensary, the names of the herbs and what they did, which Lily had always found soothing because it sounded like a story that had an answer at the end. Rosamond's hands did not shake. She had learned, a long time ago, that her hands were the part of her she could trust most completely, and she trusted them now. Gareth traced the route through 3 counties on information that grew thinner as he moved north. The chemist in Ashwick confirmed the order for feverfew, placed 4 days before the woman left. Northbound, he thought, though he hadn't asked. The coaching-in register at Martin Cross had an entry. R. Talbot, 1 adult, 1 child, 2 nights. A market stall seller at the Briar Cross Autumn Fair remembered a woman with a small, fair-haired child buying willow bark. A child's quantity, the seller said, and the woman had known exactly what she wanted, which he remembered because most people didn't. Northbound still, toward Chalk Abbot. He rode through rain for 2 days, on roads that had softened under the weight of November. And his horse was patient with him, which he was grateful for. Lady Alderton's rider caught him on the 2nd day, on the open road between Briar Cross and the Abbot Valley, with a letter sealed with his aunt's crest. He read it on horseback. The contents were what he had expected. If he did not return to Rexcombe and honor the Lowell engagement within 48 hours, she would contact the family's creditors directly and accelerate the debt proceedings. The letter was precisely worded. His aunt did not make empty threats. He folded the letter, handed it back to the rider, and said, "Tell her ladyship that the decision has already been made, and that I will write to her from Chalk Abbot." The rider looked at him for a moment, then turned his horse south. Gareth arrived at Chalk Abbot in the gray hour before dawn, the particular gray that is not yet morning, but has stopped being night. He found the sparrow's rest by the light in its downstairs window, which was the only light in the street. The innkeeper was awake, as innkeepers at dawn usually are, and answered his questions without much ceremony. Yes, a woman matching that description had been upstairs since the previous morning with a sick child. The child had been feverish through the night. The woman had not left the room. And then the innkeeper said, as an afterthought, that a solicitor from London had arrived 2 hours ago and was sleeping in the downstairs parlor. Had a magistrate's order in his coat pocket, he'd mentioned, though he hadn't said what for. Gareth looked at the parlor door, which was closed. "What time does noon come?" he said to no one in particular, and went to find a room to wash and change his coat before the morning began in earnest. Vell's solicitor presented the magistrate's order in the inn's common room at first light, before the breakfast things were properly laid, because he was a man who preferred to have difficult business completed before other people were fully awake. The innkeeper stood behind the counter and read the order when it was placed before him. And the 2 maids on the stairs had stopped on the 3rd step and were listening with the focused attention of women who understand that something significant is occurring and intend to be able to describe it accurately afterward. The solicitor was explaining the terms of the noon deadline when the front door opened. Gareth St. Aubyn came through it in his riding coat, which was travel-worn but clean, and he was not hurrying. He looked at the solicitor, at the innkeeper, at the maids on the stairs, and then at the magistrate's order on the counter. And he said, in the voice of a man who has decided what he is going to say, and intends to say it clearly. I broke my engagement to Miss Cressida Lowell by letter yesterday morning. The letter was dispatched from Briar Cross and will be in her family's hands before this afternoon. I am the Duke of Rexcombe, and I am prepared to stand personal surety for the guardianship of Lily Talbot and for Mrs. Rosamond Talbot's reputation before any court in England. I will attach my name and my title to that surety in writing before you leave this building." The solicitor looked at him. He was a capable man, as noted, but he had not expected a duke. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "the petition has been filed with the court. I am not in a position to—" "You are in a position to consult your client before proceeding," Gareth said, "which I suggest you do. My solicitor will be here within the week with the formal documentation. If Mr. Vell wishes to proceed against a duke's surety in open court, that is his decision to make." There was a silence in the common room that had a particular quality, the quality of people calculating. "I will need to consult my client," the solicitor said. "Then consult him," Gareth said. "The writing materials are on that table." The solicitor took the magistrate's order from the counter, picked up his hat, and withdrew to the parlor. Gareth looked at the innkeeper. "Which room?" he said. The innkeeper told him. He went upstairs and found the door and knocked once, quietly, and heard nothing for a moment. And then the door opened and Rosamond was there. In her working clothes, her hair pinned back with the particular efficiency of someone who has been up all night and has not thought about their hair. And she looked at him, and the expression on her face was not relief, exactly. It was the expression of someone who has been braced for one thing for a very long time, and has just been told the thing is not coming. Gareth stepped inside. The room was small and warm from the fire, and Lily was in the bed, breathing steadily. The breathing had changed. He could hear it from the door, the tight flutter gone from it. Rosamond's basket was open on the table beside the bed, the cloths folded in their rotation, the tincture bottles arranged in the order she always arranged them. "She's turning," Rosamond said very quietly. "Another hour, perhaps less." "Good," he said. He looked at her for a moment. She was standing between him and the bed, with her arms at her sides, and her hands were not shaking. But he could see from the set of her jaw that she was holding herself very still in the way people do when they are not certain what comes next. "I'm not asking you to be grateful," he said, "for what I said downstairs. That was not done for gratitude, and I don't want it." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to come back to Rexcombe," he said. "I'm not asking you to change anything about how you live or how you run the dispensary or what you decide to do with any given Tuesday." "Then what are you asking?" Rosamond said. "Whether you'll stop running," he said, "and whether you'll let me stay." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire held its low, steady light. Lily's breathing was slow, and even in the bed beside them, the fever retreating the way fevers do when they have finally lost the argument. Gradually, and then all at once, the heat giving way to something cooler and cleaner. Rosamond looked at Gareth's face, which was tired from the road and honest in the way faces are when people have stopped managing what they show. And she crossed the small distance between them and kissed him first, in the low firelight of the sick room, while the child slept. His hands came up to her face with the careful steadiness he used for everything that mattered to him, and neither of them moved for a long moment. And the fire kept its warmth. And outside the window, Chalk Abbot began its ordinary morning without them. Lily's fever broke before noon. The solicitor's carriage left the yard of the Sparrow's Rest shortly after 10, heading south. The months that followed were not simple, but they were solid in the way that things built on honest foundations are solid, not without strain, but without pretense. Josiah Vell's custody petition was quietly withdrawn before the end of November. Once Gareth's formal surety was lodged with the court. Vell had calculated his case on the assumption that Rosamond was unprotected and that a duke's name would never attach itself to the matter. When it did, the calculus changed entirely. His solicitor sent a brief letter indicating that his client had decided not to pursue the matter further. Rosamond read the letter at the dispensary counter and set it in the drawer with the other documents she kept in order, and said nothing about it to anyone except Gareth, to whom she said that evening that she was glad it was done. The estate's debts were negotiated on harder terms, longer repayment schedules, 2 seasons of reduced income, creditors who accepted the arrangement with varying degrees of grace. 400 tenant families remained on the land. The winter was difficult, and Gareth did not pretend otherwise to anyone who asked. But the tenancies held. Lady Alderton wrote him 2 letters in December, neither of which he answered at length. And by February, she had adjusted to the new arrangement with the pragmatism of a woman who has managed the St. Aubin family long enough to know which battles are already decided. The dispensary at Penrose Cross reopened in March. When the first herbs were ready in the garden, Gareth arranged the materials: a repaired roof, new shelves for the front room, a counter that did not lean. And he arranged them without making them into a gift that required anything from her, which she noticed and did not comment on directly. Though one afternoon, while they were stacking the new shelves together, she said, without looking up from the jar she was labeling, "You're careful not to make me feel managed." "You'd tell me if I did," he said. "I would," she agreed. She ran the dispensary herself, kept her own accounts, turned no one away for inability to pay. She was known by summer as the woman who had come back, which was not the same as being new and was better. Lily started coming downstairs to help with the simpler work, learning the names of the herbs with the systematic focus she applied to everything she decided was worth knowing. Peter, who was spending more time at Penrose Cross as the months went on, had opinions about the labeling system that Lily did not share. And the 2 children conducted this disagreement with the focused intensity of people who have found a worthy opponent and intend to take full advantage of it. 6 months after Chalky Abbot, on a Tuesday evening at dusk, the argument about the labeling system had run its full course and exhausted both parties, and Lily and Peter were asleep upstairs above the dispensary, having managed a full hour of civil coexistence before the evening settled the matter for them. The dispensary was quiet. The last of the autumn light came through the front window in long, low bars and lay across the new counter and the rows of jars and the workbench where the mortar and the tincture bottles stood in their order. Gareth closed the dispensary door from the inside. A single candle was left burning in the window, visible from the lane, the ordinary signal that the dispensary was occupied and well, which in Penrose Cross had always meant that Rosamond was there, and that whoever needed her could find her, and that she was not going anywhere.